Welcome. This is Jay Larson, CEO of the Idaho Technology Council. Thank you for joining us for our weekly podcast, Innovation Matters. During these trying times, many people have transitioned to living remotely, working remotely, and doing a lot of work on the internet. Work and education at home have become more common than ever, and e-commerce has been explosive. And tremendous growth has taken place on orders and delivery. With this change, the focus on processing speeds and online security protection have become a priority. Today we are talking big data with Josh Johnston, Director of Artificial Intelligence Science from Kount, which is redefining the future of fraud prevention through AI. But first, we are going to talk with Eric Whiting, Division Director of Advanced Scientific Computing at the Idaho National Laboratory, INL supercomputer. Sawtooth, which is named after the Idaho mountain range. With over 100,000 processors, it ranks 37th on the 2019 top fastest semicomputers in the world. And what's even more impressive than that is I think it's the fastest in the Northwest. So, Eric, welcome, and welcome to Innovation Matters.
Hey, Jay, thank you. Thanks for inviting me to be on your program. I appreciate all that you and your group are doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. We really do. What we really appreciate, Eric, is, and something that I think that has been something I found out over the last 11 years, is really how awesome Idaho National Laboratory is with respect to the assets that it does, what it provides for the country on multiple aspects within energy, cybersecurity, national homeland security, wireless testing. But let's talk a little bit about what is Sawtooth.
So I guess overall Sawtooth. Let's talk about Sawtooth. Sawtooth it's a supercomputer. It's a $20 million supercomputer. It's specially designed and it's operated to support scientific modeling and simulation at the Idaho National Laboratory. And you can compare modeling and simulation to a microscope. It's an instrument. It's an instrument that improves our ability to see. So as an example, Jay, using the computer, we can build very high resolution models of a nuclear reactor, and then we can run simulations on the supercomputer to look inside. We can view the dynamics of the water flow. We can kind of metaphorically see the radiation. We can study the heat that's created and how the heat flows and through the water and different things. And then we can also study, unexpected scenarios. And the microscope can let us even zoom into the molecular or atomistic scale if we want to understand how metal and concrete act in this environment. And I guess one more thing I'd like to mention about the tool, it allows us to either speed up time or slow down time. So you might have an event that's very short duration, just a very short transient or something that you want to study. Using the supercomputer, you can zoom in on that time scale and you can play that time over an extended period and kind of see what happens in that short transient. Or you can go to the far other extreme. You can run a model, you can simulate what happens to materials, metals, or concrete over 100 or 1,000 years. So to do an experiment to see what concrete looks like 1,000 years from now is kind of impractical, but the computer lets us visualize that. Helps us build better systems.
So how important is Sawtooth to all this modeling and everything that takes place and simulation to what the Idaho National Laboratory does?
So modeling and simulation it cross-cuts almost all that we do. I think modern science is sometimes compared to a stool. Let's call it a three-legged stool. One of the legs is theory. Theory is kind of what you learn in school. Another leg is experiment, and INL is very focused on experiment and theory. But by themselves, you can only gain so much insight. The third leg of the stool is modeling and simulation. It helps bridge the gaps where maybe you can't do experiments. And I guess in the context of this discussion today, there's many people have added a fourth leg to the stool, and that's the data science, the data science, data analytics, the data side also. Data is an important part of the stool too.
So sometime, I had a great opportunity to walk through Sawtooth and the whole data center. I mean, the expansion, I mean, what it does, but I mean, you've got a fantastic facility over in Idaho Falls in this that helps support all of the operations of the INL. What's the difference between what Sawtooth does and a data center?
Okay, so data center is a generic term for the home of the computers. So data center is a term that's used in the industry for the facility that brings in the networking that's required for the computers, like the iron network, which comes in to feed Sawtooth, the power, the large amounts of power that feed the system, and then the cooling that cools it. So the data center is a generic term for the facility that holds the equipment. And Jay, I should mention that I kind of talked about how without Sawtooth we cannot do our mission. Sawtooth is essential to our mission. I want to emphasize that without the data center, without the collaborative computing facility and the data center there, we would not be able to operate Sawtooth. So this partnership with the state of Idaho in constructing the facility and providing a space for the computer was huge. It was, without it, we wouldn't have the machine. We're very grateful for the partnership.
That's great to show that partnership. And so on some of this stuff, Eric, talk about what your responsibilities are with the INL. Just kind of talk about it overall, and then how that ties into areas within what you're doing with respect to artificial intelligence and other type of work that's taking place with the INL.
So within the Collaborative Computing Center, we host the core scientific computing systems of the laboratory. So our group helps manage those systems. We operate them. We help, coordinate with facilities. We help install the software and make the software work. You can imagine, putting an app on your phone is one level of complexity. Putting a software on your desktop computer is one level of complexity. But then making a piece of software run across 10,000 processors or 100,000 processors it takes some expertise to do that. And our division also is responsible for, within this advanced scientific computing division, we also are responsible for building some of the software frameworks that are used. Like you've heard, I think in your time visiting INL, you may have heard of the Moose modeling and simulation framework. It's a tool set for writing these codes that help you understand the science that we're studying. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, in addition, the other staff in our facility in the Collaborative Computing Center are actually writing the code that takes the physics that they're trying to study and understand. And they write the code and they work synergistically with everybody, together with the people in the building, and we run the code. And I'd also like to mention that just running the models and simulation by themselves is only half of the problem. The other half is we need to do experiments out on the desert in the site and validate, because just running a simulation without a validation is it's good, but it's not as effective as if you can validate it with the real experiments.
I know some of this stuff is super security. Can you give an example of anything that some of the things that you're doing?
Yeah. So I guess one of the flagship codes of the Moose framework is an application called Bison. And Bison is a tool that helps us design fuel and understand fuel, how nuclear fuel acts depending on how it's constructed, how it's put together, how it acts with heat and pressure and vibration and radiation. So Bison is a tool that is running on the supercomputers that help us improve the operation of current reactors and also help us design the new fleet of advanced reactors. You've heard about, there's a ton of excitement about small modular reactors. and you've heard about the term of microreactors, even a smaller scale reactor. All of these new technologies rely on the foundational computing capabilities in our systems.
That is, it's kind of interesting as I look at it. You have bison, you've got moose, you've got sawtooth. I mean, something's got to be about mountains and the wildlife in Idaho, right? I mean, this is great.
Well, so Jay, just my memory, and others might correct me, but I think when moose was created, they first used some kind of Greek mythology names, and someone said, no, that's a bad theme. You need a different theme. So the team that was developing the frameworks chose Idaho animals, and they printed out a list of all the Idaho animals, and so the applications became the animal names: bison, grizzly, different elk,
different things,
yeah, like that.
I like it. So,
and then when we were purchasing the computer, when we were purchasing the last couple of computers, we said, you know what, the animals live in the mountains. So we have another supercomputer called Lemhi, named after the Lemhi Range in Idaho. So
nice.
Lemhi and Sawtooth are most recent machines.
The most recent, and I know that we have. I think it's Eric Grizzly Adams Whiting is what I hear. But anyway.
Oh no.
But let's this is kind of interesting. But so if you can just talk about this, the computing power that's at INL because of Sawtooth. Can you go back 10 years ago and say how much is it amplified, and I know you were talking about the capacity and everything, but how much more capacity, and why is that such a big thing? What's changed so much over the last decade?
Well, I guess just the number you're asking for is, when I started at INL about 15 years ago, our computer was 6,000 times slower. So how about that? Our Sawtooth is 6,000 times faster.
Wow.
So the technical term. So this is your technical word that you can share with your friends. It's petaflop. So, and petaflop isn't your dog doing like flips or something like. Petaflop is a technical term that we use for the amount of computing that the computer can do, the amount of math it can do. And Jay, if you'd let me just give you a brief analogy to talk about what a petaflop is, or what 6 petaflops is. So I'm gonna take you and I back to when we were in 3rd grade, and they were teaching us multiplication. They gave us a worksheet. The teacher gave us 2-digit numbers, and you and I had to multiply those numbers and get the right answer. And if we got in trouble, the teacher would give us 100 of them, and we had to get them all right before we could go to recess or something like that. So I want you to imagine, if we were really in trouble and we had 6,000 problems, and we were 3rd graders, and they were all 15-digit multiplication. So you kind of have a vision of that.
Okay.
So that worksheet with 6,000 problems, the Sawtooth computer can complete that worksheet, get them all right, and it can do that worksheet 1 trillion times each second. So Jay, this math that would take me 1 trillion years to get them all right just once, this worksheet with 6,000 problems,
right.
It would take me 1 trillion years to do it just once, and I'd never get them right. The computer does it 1 trillion times each second. So
each second.
So it's a ton of math. That's your technical word for the day.
Yeah.
That's the capacity, 6 petaflops.
So if you sat there, Eric, one of the major missions of INL has always been in nuclear energy, right? Trying to find the refinement, the ability to be able to look for better ways for us to be able to have energy that's going to lead us into the future.
Exactly.
So now that you relate that down to this, I mean, how you help quantify that, why is this so important as you look at energy and the future of the energy for the United States?
There's a couple things that we need to do. I guess as we look at the next generation of nuclear reactors, we're doing, well, first of all, we're doing all we can to sustain the existing fleet. So, allow the existing fleet to operate more efficiently in terms of cost. Allow them, ensure that the existing fleet of reactors operates safely. In terms of future, we need to make the work that INL does is helping us design the next generation of nuclear reactors that will be that will be able to continue to operate safely and efficiently.
Well, and I like that because you go out and I mean, you take a look. You've got a lot of simulations that talk about how a nuclear reactor will react based upon certain stimulus, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's I'm amazed at the amount of data that comes through. I'll ask you this question because this is kind of fun. Napoleon Bonaparte actually came up with. He said, "War is 80% about information." So if you talk about information, is that the same thing with the INL? Are you 80% about information? I mean, if you take a look at all this stuff, I know, and the massaging or the artificial intelligence that kind of comes out about that information, or how does that work with the INL?
You know what? Maybe this won't answer the question exactly directly, Jay, but I'll say that the experimental facilities at INL generate a lot of data. And, you know, the new sensor technologies, you know, they can sample data streams at 1,000 times a second up to 1,000,000 times a second. We can capture so much data now through many sensors. And maybe I'll tie this into your question about, you know, next generation. So all this data as it comes through, we need systems that can analyze it quickly and understand, you know, what the data streams mean. I guess an application of that could be in an environment with a lot of microreactors positioned at many locations. We might need to rely more on artificial intelligence and machine learning to kind of be watching those data streams and understand what's happening and predict and you know, understand what's happening in the microreactors distributed all around.
So Eric, this has been fantastic, and I know that as I look at what the INL does and the future of what the INL will contribute to the Idaho economy and how it impacts the United States and the world, having Sawtooth is probably one of the most important things you could have. Would that be an accurate statement?
It is, but the only caution I'm going to throw out in that, or the qualifier, Jay, is we purchase a new machine every 4 years. So Sawtooth is very useful, but just like your cell phone, take your cell phone and look at it. You know, a month after you buy it, it's kind of obsolete, right?
Yes, yeah.
And you know, if you're using a 4-year-old cell phone, that's awesome. The
Right.
computer also, it's what's important to the sustaining INL's leadership in this modeling simulation is the continual refresh. You know, over the years, every 3 or 4 years, it's a new machine that we deploy. So Sawtooth is a step, but we're already looking to the next step.
Yeah, that. So you have the infrastructure, which is what Sawtooth is, but probably the most important part that kind of comes in that is that you have to continue to refresh and reiterate out. But I will say one other thing. Probably the biggest advantage or what you have as far as the resource are the innovative people at INL. So that Sawtooth really helps you do your business much more effectively because of the modeling, the simulation, everything that it does, correct?
And it's not just the people at INL, Jay, it's the people across the state of Idaho, it's the people across the nation. The system is used by about half of our users are external.
Oh, is that right? So it's just not, I mean, so also you talked about that partnership you had with the state and all those type of things, but this is, you have a lot of people outside that are also optimizing the power of Sawtooth.
Exactly. So people at Idaho universities are logging in every day. People at other national laboratories that are doing related work, nuclear energy research, they log in every day. And people from industry log in every day to help with their work in modeling simulation.
Well, we really appreciate you, Eric, taking time with us on this. We would love to be able to have maybe another time where we actually talk about a couple models that you've actually done and maybe actually walk through what you can talk about, because I know there's a lot of national security issues that you guys deal with over at the lab. But would that be okay to have you on another time to talk about some of this modeling?
Yeah, we'd be happy to talk more. It's exciting. We're doing exciting things. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And if if we have Eric Grizzly Adams Whiting, or maybe we'll keep working on that code name that we'll have for you. All right.
Okay. Very good.
All
Thank
right.
you. Yep.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Well, let's go to our next. So, Josh Johnston with Kount. Josh, welcome to Innovation Matters.
Thanks, Jay. It's good to be here.
We're so glad to have you. I see that you've changed from a river to the lake. What lake is that behind you, Josh?
Geez, which lake is this? Blue Lake, I think.
Blue Lake? Okay. Well, we appreciate that. I know that you're a Boise guy, right? Didn't you go to Boise High?
I did. I graduated from Boise High and went away for 13 years, plotting my eventual triumphant return to the state. And I've been back here for 5 or 6 years now, and not leaving again.
Well, we're so glad to have you back. So as we just talked to Eric, which is obviously the computing capacity of what Sawtooth allows, and the amazing. I mean, because I remember sitting in a meeting about a year ago, and it was fantastic because we had Brad Wiskerson, the CEO, who obviously you work with, and he was talking about how the difference has taken place in the last 10 years with Kount, in that whenever you go out and you find some points of information to be able to validate, like a credit card or something like that, that you used to have like maybe 3 million points of information that you'd look at, and you'd do it instantly, like Eric was talking about. Now you're looking at like 3 billion or something like that. I mean, it's astronomically it's almost hard to comprehend what Kount does with data and with artificial intelligence. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So actually, right kind of before I get to that point, I want to piggyback off of what you and Eric were talking about. When you're saying what we're doing at Kount and where that's come from, and the importance of people and relationships here. When I came back to Boise, my first job back here was actually as a research scientist at Boise State. I was working on a grant there for a project called MILES, which is managing Idaho's landscapes for ecosystem services.
Hold on. It's not an animal name. It's not like something to do with mountains.
No, this one, the name came from somewhere else.
Okay,
but that project was is a collaboration between the universities in Idaho as well as Idaho National Labs, and that's where Eric and I first ran into each other, was during that work. And then I was a cyber infrastructure engineer at Boise State, helping researchers get access to supercompute resources through Department of Energy and some other places, including Idaho National Labs again. And from there, found my way over to Kount, and we're still pulling students from those same kinds of pathways, the collaboration of the universities and and the national labs. So I think it's very important to understand that we're talking about very different applications, right? I'm going to talk about how Kount protects digital identities and stops credit card fraud. The technologies that we're using, both in terms of the infrastructure, but also the algorithms, the artificial intelligence, machine learning, the big data, the way we process all of this. This is an ecosystem of itself. And it's very important that for all of us in this space, that this ecosystem exists now in Idaho. And I think if you go back, to 15 years ago when Eric started at INL, there was not an ecosystem, here for this. And a lot of what we're able to do, the people we're able to pull in, and the resources that we have, the relationships with institutions, that's there's a lot more similarities between this technology than I think we see, for the applications.
And Josh, I would say, just to add on to that, it's imperative that the growth that you've just discussed, that you just mentioned, is imperative to take place as we continue to grow a knowledge economy in Idaho, and we actually talk about the network that's taking place. And it's significant, because also take a look at the time frame that you just referenced. Think about what took place during that same time frame when Kount was just started, and now it's we're a leader in cybersecurity fraud, right?
Yep. Yeah, and for folks that have not heard about Kount, which always kind of surprises me, when I go and talk to students at Boise State and NNU and other places, and I'm talking to folks, Kount's not always on their radar screen. I think that we're not as well known in Boise as some of the other businesses, and I frankly think the reason for that is because we've done a very good job of hanging on to our employees. So if you're talking to somebody who has worked at Kount, you're probably talking to someone who works at Kount. We have not. It's a great place to work, and it's a place that people tend to show up and stick to. So while I don't think we're as well known in town, as some other places, we are the recognized industry leader for fraud prevention. Our bread and butter has historically been preventing credit card fraud. And the business model for this is that we all know if somebody steals our credit card and buys things with it, we're not liable for that fraud. Most of us think it's the bank that eats that cost. And that's true for what's called card-present transactions, which is, it's a term of art. It's not quite as technical as petaflops, but a card-present transaction is a transaction where the card is present. So if you're at a store and you swipe or use the chip for a transaction, that's a card-present transaction. And the banks generally do carry the liability for that. However, if the fraudster has gone online and does what's called a card-not-present transaction, where they're entering the credit card number or saying it over the phone, there's actually still people do things over the phone sometimes these days, the liability for that is actually with the merchant. So somebody steals something, goes, to Best Buy and buys something. The bank's going to pay for that. They steal a credit card, go to bestbuy.com. Best Buy is going to pay for it. So our customers are merchants and payment processors that are trying to make the right decisions about whether there's a fraudster or not, who is, whether you are who you say you are when you visit one of our customers. And from there, we have expanded into adjacent areas in digital identity protection and account protection, because I think if you think about your own spending habits, most of us have moved from entering a credit card every time we buy something to using an app or a website where our credentials are stored. So the credit card's already in there, and the risk is that somebody is going to get our login and our password, because we all tend to reuse passwords. And there are breaches out there, and people get their hands on these things, and that exposes a new path for the fraudsters to come in and exploit our financial information.
This is interesting. What percentage of transactions are done online as opposed to in person?
It's a good question, and there is the payment space is as a industry is very fragmented, and so these numbers are difficult to come by. So I don't know what fraction it is. I will say it's a heck of a lot higher now than it was in, say, February. The fraction of transactions that occur online versus that occur in person. So it has been a tremendously interesting year so far. We've seen, obviously, portions of the economy that have struggled greatly. Obviously, places like travel and leisure and entertainment that require gatherings, ticketing. Those are places where we're all spending a lot less. And then we've seen many other areas that where we're doing things online instead of going into the stores, which have either been closed or less convenient than they used to be.
Yeah, so Josh, talk a little bit about, you were brought in to really help with artificial intelligence. Talk about your artificial intelligence. What's happening with artificial intelligence? Then expand that out if you can to maybe some machine learning type things, and how that intersects or what the differences are there.
Sure. So I was really enjoying the conversation that you and Eric had about modeling, because this is an area that I think most folks out there don't have good familiarity with modeling and how it relates to science. When we are in school, we're taught the scientific method, and the scientific method goes something like do some exploratory investigation, come up with a hypothesis, run an experiment, hopefully trying to vary as few variables as possible, maintaining our controls, and then being able to see whether that hypothesis was true or false. In the real world, we can't always run experiments for things. You find when we're talking about energy production, sometimes it's time scales. When we want to test that concrete 1,000 years, from now, when we want to go and we want to test something like a nuclear chain reaction that occurs much faster than our instruments can actually collect the data. In order to do this, we have to have a model. And a model is just a representation that behaves in one or more ways like a real system. And in my space, when we're trying to predict fraud, the real system is a fraudster goes and does something with your information, and later it turns out that was bad, and either you're out the money or a merchant's out the money. Somebody has to pay for that. That process usually takes some matter of months. If it's credit card fraud, it takes until you see it on the credit card statement, and then you figure out that, if you're like me, you sit there and I'm like, did I buy this? I don't remember. And then I ask my wife, and she's like, no, I didn't do that. And eventually, maybe a couple of months later, this comes back, and you realize that this is fraud. So the models that we're generating are, we want to model that process, and we want to execute it in under 250 milliseconds. So that's less time than it takes to blink. And that's because when you are going and buying something from one of our customers, we collect information about that transaction. We need to evaluate that and determine a couple of months from now, is this going to be fraud or not? So our model, we want to get the same outcome that you're going to get in the real world, but we want to get there faster. And it's not always that we want to run a model faster. Again, some of these models that you run, especially about something like a nuclear reaction, the model is going to take much longer than real time to run, but it's going to give us greater resolution than we would have had. But in my space, the interest is in being able to run these things faster and more cheaply than having to go back and pay the money. So that's the science part that we're doing, is we are developing models that accurately reflect what's going to happen in the real world. One of the techniques that we use for that is called machine learning. And machine learning is where, instead of having to generate these models entirely by hand through a set of rules or some kind of encoding of expert knowledge, we're able to take very large amounts of data and use algorithms that can learn from that data themselves. That's the machine learning approach. It's usually computationally expensive, which is one of the reasons, we talk about computers having access to 6,000 times the resources that we had in the past. That's one of the necessary prerequisites for machine learning. Another thing that we need is to have very large amounts of data. And so both the ability to capture that data, to store it, and to process it properly is also necessary for that. And when we put all of that together, artificial intelligence is the quality of a machine exercising something that looks like human judgment. So when a machine can make a decision or have an insight, and we look at it and say, wow, I wouldn't think computers could do that. That's artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence, while it is a loose collection of techniques and a field of study, really when we're talking about it, it's more of the outcome of this computing infrastructure, the algorithms, the data, the models that we've generated, so that the machine can make these decisions that would otherwise require a human. And because a computer is making it, now we can make them potentially much faster, and by incorporating much more data than if we had humans doing this evaluation.
So, Josh, that was a great explanation. I love the idea, the part that you talked about, where you bring all that information, and essentially you're trying to do it so they can have human judgment. I mean, so all of these things are coming together. So you're saying, okay, what if? And so you do all this, and it comes together. There's the old saying, knowledge is power. That plays really big with what you're doing here, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
it does. I mean, it is fundamentally what you are, is you're bringing all this stuff together. Okay, so talk about what you see. I mean, I don't want us to be too much in the future about other type of things, but what's one of the big things you think is going to take place because of artificial intelligence and machine learning in the next 5-10 years? What are your thoughts? What's one big thing that's going to take place?
So what's really interesting about artificial intelligence is that the goalposts are constantly moving. So I gave an accurate but highly subjective definition, which is when a computer does something that makes us think, oh, I wouldn't have thought a computer was good at that. When I was back in high school at Boise High in 1999, IBM had a computer beat Garry Kasparov, who was maybe the greatest chess player of all time, grandmaster, and the computer beat him, and that was the first time that a computer had beat a grandmaster. And when I graduated from college in 2005, that was the last time that a human grandmaster beat the world's top chess playing computer. So in a course of about 6 years, we went from human parity at the top end to being untouchable. And while I was in grad school, right after that, my class I took on artificial intelligence, we talked about how chess was kind of done. There's still been research that's happened there, but beating humans at chess was a solved problem. And now my wife teaches calculus in high school. When I go and talk to her classes, they basically say, well, of course my phone can beat me at chess, like it's a computer. Why wouldn't it be able to beat me? So this is something that, my field spent a lot of time and effort on accomplishing. And now we just look at it and we think this is something that obviously a computer is going to be better at a person than. So I cut my teeth in self-driving cars and robotics, unmanned systems in the field. And this is an area we've seen a lot of progress. There's a lot of technical advancements that need to happen. I think there's a lot of business challenges as to how people are going to productize that technology that the space is moving through. But this will be a good example of this. When I first started working on, we didn't even call them driverless cars back then because we hadn't come up with that term. We called them autonomous vehicles. The marketing people got to it and they improved it a little bit. But when I was working on autonomous vehicles and I would go to my wife's classes and talk to her students, I'd show them a video of one of our Humvees when I was at Carnegie Mellon University. One of our Humvees driving itself. And I'd say, this vehicle's driving itself. And they'd be like, wow, that's crazy. Where's the guy? Like, where's the person who's driving it? Where's he sitting? And it's like, no, it's driving itself. Well, how does it know where to go? How does it see? Things like that. These days, I go and show those same videos to my wife's classes, and they're like, yeah, that's like a pretty crappy self-driving car, isn't it? And so we're seeing that progression. And
Yeah.
And right now, we still think that this is an unusual and hard challenge, but I think you're going to find, and 5 years is probably ambitious, but you're going to find that this is a place where, where my kids, as they grow up, they're going to get to a point where they say, well, obviously a car can drive itself better than I can drive. I'm a easily distractible human being that is fallible and makes bad decisions. That's kind of the definition of being a human being. So. We'll see improvements there. We've seen huge advancements that I think has been actually kind of quiet in image captioning and image understanding. The fact that I can go into Google Photos and I can type in a search term and it shows me pictures of that. And I put in weird stuff sometimes and I think, oh, there's no way this is going to be in here. I'll put in porcupine or something like that. And it's like, oh no, it knows what a porcupine is. It'll find my picture of a porcupine. That's something that wasn't even on our radar screen 10 or 15 years ago. And that's been huge advancements in machine learning to do that. I think the last area that I see the biggest improvement is natural language processing, which is related to that image captioning. It's the spoken or written version of understanding. And the idea that we primarily find information using a computer by going into a search bar, by putting ourselves in the mindset of how does a search engine work? Let me remove the unnecessary words that are in this question and put it into a computer so it can give me the answer. That's not how we're going to think in 5 or 10 years. We're going to be able to have natural conversations where I ask for some information, I get something back from the computer, and then I say, that's not exactly what I was looking for. I provide a little more information, I get something back. That happening as a natural conversation, is going to be huge, and we're making big progress towards it now. But it's, I think if you're using Alexa or a tool like that, you realize it's still at the stages that when it works, it surprises us. Mm-hmm. And it's going to move from being, that's why right now we call it artificial intelligence, and it's going to move from there to just being something that computers are good at, and we're not surprised that it works that way.
And it'll be a natural. I loved the stories as you look at the grandmaster in chess and how that's all changed now. Our ability to look at autonomous driving vehicles. If we look at those 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, you would sit there and go, wow. And then how that's going to evolve, and the future evolution of artificial intelligence and the way that it's socialized will really be. In fact, we'll have this discussion 5 years from now. How does that sound?
Sure.
And we'll see some monster changes. This has been great, Josh. You and Eric have been great. I didn't realize that you and Eric had this background and this history with each other.
Again, we've got a community here in Idaho around big data, visualization, data science, and it's important to all of us. I think a lot of us know each other. We have our groups. We get together. We mutually support each other, and it's absolutely critical. I get questions sometimes from people in Silicon Valley about, can you really build a group doing artificial intelligence in Boise, Idaho? Like, is that really something that you can do? And I always point back and say, well, since I've built one, then yes, I'm pretty confident that it is possible.
That is the best part, is because you've done it. And I want to tell you, last year with Develop Idaho, you did a wonderful job leading a panel that had Sterling Anderson part of it. Didn't you think Sterling Anderson's presentation back then was Sterling Anderson's one of the top autonomous vehicles person on the planet, wouldn't you say?
I would, yes.
And he was here, and you did a fantastic job. And just in maybe 30 seconds, tell everybody what was his message about the future of autonomous vehicles.
So he's talking about how they're coming, and I think that Sterling has started a business called Aurora with a couple of other folks, one of whom is Chris Urmson, who I worked with when I was at Carnegie Mellon working on autonomous vehicles, because again, it's a small field. We collaborated with INL when I worked for a company in Utah on autonomous vehicles back in the mid 2000s as well. I think if you look at what Aurora is doing and what Sterling Anderson is doing there, they are trying to solve the business problem of self-driving cars. Because at this point, the technology is moving along, and the fundamental question is, how do you monetize it and productize it and inject it into the automobile industry, which is basically just one big giant supply chain.
That's great. Thank you for that. I really want to make sure I bring out one point that you made, and this is the network that we have with artificial intelligence, supercomputing, that's taken place with the Idaho National Laboratory, which has been a 76 years of wonder for the state of Idaho. What Boise State and other universities are doing, we're connected with that. And now we're tying in what industry is driving, which is helping monetize all these things through Kount and other industries, is what's going to help lead Idaho into the future and help us be one of the top innovative states in the union. So thanks so much, Josh, to you and Eric for the work that you guys are doing. And we'll have you on another time to be able to give us some more stories about the future of AI and machine learning. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Thanks again for everybody that's been on here. Thanks for Eric and Josh for being on Innovation Matters. A quote was given to me not too long ago. It said, data helps us make more informed decisions, but if you don't want to use data, use my opinion. And I would much prefer to be able to use data to help arrive at a decision based upon just using someone's opinion. So that's the reason it's so important to have data and to be able to have that help us formulate our future. We will not have Innovation Matters next week because it's going to be the 3rd of July. We would encourage everybody to have a very fun, safe 4th of July, an innovative 4th of July. We will be back on the 9th of July and look forward to everything that takes place there. Remember, in Idaho, Innovation Matters and the Idaho Technology Council focuses on keeping us connected and helping us drive an innovative economy. Thanks so much, and be safe out there. As we adapt to changing times where organizations and government agencies are working remotely,